Okay, no survey of photography would be complete if we didn't talk about historical photographers behind these great photographs that we're talking about. So that's what we're going to do today. And I'm going to go rather quick and only give you kind of an overview of some of my favorites. When you do your photographer's report, there's a lot more in there to work with and a lot more styles involved. But I'm just going to show you a few here. I'm going to start with Ansel Adams. Now, to most people, Ansel Adams is not exactly a household word, although when you get into the photography circles, he's what we would call a giant. And I like to start here with him because he is ours. In other words, he lived in Yosemite for most of his life. He has close ties to Central California, Carmel, Monterey, and he's a world-renowned photographer. What I like about Adams' work is he has a sense of the micro and the macro of the world, uses contrast in a tremendous way. He liked to use something called pre-visualization, where he would actually go out and frame the photograph in his mind and the camera, in fact using a technique like this, which many photographers still do, with a piece of cardboard cut out to the aspect ratio of the photograph, and then shoot a scenic or a fine art photograph in that mode, and it works really, really well. Mostly he's known for his scenics and his photographs of the Great Southwest and Yosemite and the Grand Tetons and a variety of different places. But Ansel Adams, I mean, he shot for 75 years and printed for another 15 or 20 after that. He has a simplicity to his work and a simple beauty, all in black and white, no color whatsoever. He has a sense of the majestic and a sense of the close-knit, something that you would ordinarily might not look at as a thing of beauty, and yet it is. He also shot portraits. Most people don't know this, but he shot some very strong portraits in the same style that he did his other work. One of his most famous photographs is Moonrise Hernandez. In a later video, I may get into a little bit more detail about this photograph and how he chanced upon it, and it has become the most treasured photograph of his entire catalog and collection. But he also did some industrial work and social context things. So, the message to take from something like Ansel Adams and everybody else is when you get into photography, if you chose to make this your vocation, you end up doing it all. You don't end up just doing scenics or landscapes or fine art or documentary like I do. You do a little bit of everything. So we're going to move on here in a little bit. Again, this is still Ansel Adams, but I want to talk about another photographer that I really like called Elliot Erwitt. Now, the reason I like Elliot Erwitt, he's a commercial photographer, still alive, by the way. I think he's like 94 or something like that. But he does commercial work, but his work also, he likes to take a camera and have a sense of humor here, like this photograph from the Louvre, where people are looking at an image with a sign that basically says this photograph under restoration. Even Blue Boy to the left is looking at it, which is kind of an ironic, silly type photograph. And Elliot Erwitt's photographs make you pause and take a look at it, which makes it kind of a unique type of way of doing it. Now, this is not how he makes his money. This is his fun stuff that he likes to do for himself. But he does do commercial work. Also, one of the things you'll see when you study the masters, if you study them any length of time, you'll see that many of their most famous photographs from their catalogs or portfolios are taken either of family members or close to home. For instance, Ansel Adams, I already talked about. He lived in Yosemite, so he was shooting in his backyard. In this photograph of Elliot Erwitt's, this is his first wife with his first child. Walked in from coming home from work one day. Hi, honey, I'm home. Hey, I'm back in the bedroom with the baby, and there's this photograph. The difference lots of times between some of the great photographers and just like you and me or other people who don't think about photography is they have a sense of when the moment is upon them, and they seize it and they shoot it. And in Elliot Erwitt's photography, you see this probably more clearly than anything else. But they do. They make you laugh. They make me laugh anyway. There is a sensitivity. There is a sense of discovery and a slowing down of the visual bombardment that we have in society, even then when he was doing these things, that tends to make his work more meaningful. And I hope in this course that's what you'll do, is have a sense of discovery about you, and you'll see things differently when you carry a camera. For instance, on this one, the only way you see this picture is to get on the ground in the mud. That's the only way you see it. And again, one of his most famous photographs from his portfolio. Another photographer on the opposite end of the spectrum is Eugene Richards. Eugene Richards, again, is also alive. Rather, he's getting up there in years, but Richards went into the drug dens in the Bronx back in the 60s and the 70s and lived there for a number of weeks and put his life in danger in these areas. These are areas where the cops won't even go. Some of these photographs here, this is just a portion of what he did during that period. But this is a 14-year-old drug addict and basically hooked on crack cocaine. And he documented her life on the streets in this project. So this is documentary style work in a social context, showing man's triumphs and trials and issues and things like that. This is the type of photography I like to do. It's not the type of photography everybody likes and enjoys. I understand it. It's uncomfortable to some people, but that's okay. But these are the type of photographs that lots of times will make societal changes. These are photographs that have changed your life, believe it or not. Photograph here of a drug addict shooting up with heroin and his picture of his newborn baby on the coffee table. What chance does this poor kid have for a normal life? Those type of questions that are put in there. But that's the type of things that somebody like Eugene Richards goes after. Again, look at that eye. You can't get past this photograph without looking at that eye. You catch the needle in the mouth, but the eye is just captivating in its madness. Another documentary photographer I really enjoy is Mary Ellen Mark. Now, she just passed away last year, but she has had a stellar career in documenting projects that she liked in ways she liked to do. For instance, she loved to go to India and photograph things in India. She found it very, very exciting. She made her money basically shooting on movie studios and commercial work, but some documentary work as well. One of her most famous things is on teen pregnancy and children having children. Some of these pictures you're seeing here, they were published in major magazines and used as institutes who are trying to help these kids and things like that. She did a big extensive story on drug use and on homelessness, this being one of her most famous photographs from an LA family. There's a sensitivity, there's a sense of moment here. It looks like perhaps this photograph was a little more manipulated in the sense of placing and posing the people, which may be possible. She never basically explained it, but yet at the same time there's a tenderness. Notice the girl's hand on the cheek of her brother. This was a very middle-class family up until illness and unemployment raised its head, and they basically went down the tubes in drug use. And the family basically disintegrated. It's really kind of a tough situation, and again, hard to look at. Again, another one from her homeless work. She spent time in a women's maximum security prison and documented the lives of the mentally ill in there. In other words, Mary Ellen Mark took a lot of chances for not a lot of financial gain. I mean, she didn't make a lot of money in her life off her photography, but she was always on the cusp looking at what's the next big social issue and how do we portray that so people will understand it. Again, another one from her homeless kids thing, or street kids. I liked Mary Ellen Mark a lot. I watched her career for many years, and she was always very upfront about, you're not going to make a lot of money in documentary photography, but you will see a lot of life. Now, another photographer, again, along a documentary vein, although he does a lot of fine artwork, is Sebastiao Salgado. He is much more contemporary in nature, photographs a lot of third world. He's out of Bolivia, I believe, does assignments all over the world for different magazines and organizations, very involved in the environment and how they are ruining the environment, particularly in South America, but worldwide. Here's one of his photographs from his thing about environment, about miners, and how many of the indigenous people of South America are used basically almost as slave labor in the mines to mine cobalt and things like that, like going to our cell phones and things like that. That's the type of issues that Salgado is involved in. He has a very strong sensitivity of again, macro and micro, kind of like Ansel Adams, except with the human content, and that's what I really like. Again, works primarily in black and white. Notice this is one of the mines here. Notice all the people on the other side. It shows you how big this mine is, and these guys have to go down into these platforms here, these little plateaus, mine the stuff, haul them off on rocks up these ladders and stuff. It's very, very primitive in its manner, and this is what Salgado got in to photograph and show us in different ways. And yet he has an intimacy with his subjects and how he photographs them. Very, very, very exciting work, I think, and you can take a look at his work. Now, again, historically, another one of the most famous photographs of history is Dorethea Lange's Migrant Mother. This photograph was shot right over in Napomo, of all places, over on the Central Coast. And if you take my Photo 30 class, we get heavily into the backstory of how Dorethea Lange came about this photograph. This photograph is probably more so than any other one of the most dramatic photographs that changed the lives of many in the world. And that's just, frankly, my opinion. But there is a tenderness, there is a determination, there's all kinds of emotions come through if you spend some time observing this photograph and looking at it. It's very powerful. She shot much of her work came from the Great Depression, working for the Farm Security Administration. And she was a portrait photographer out of San Francisco. She wasn't documentary in any way, but she centered her work on portraiture during the Great Depression and came away with some of the most dramatic portraits ever during a country in crisis, which is what we were in the Great Depression. Continuing on with the West Coast tradition in the fine art mode was Edward Weston, his famous pepper number 29. I think there were 68 different peppers. Basically, he went to the farmer's market, got a crate of peppers, came home and photographed them in his kitchen sink. And this is, again, one of the most famous photographs of his catalog. And if you look closely enough at this pepper, you can see a torso. Different people see different things, see a body, see two lovers together, they see a fist, they see, some people even say they see a pepper. There's a variety of different things you see. But Edward Weston took the science of photography and made aesthetic art from it in what they call now the West Coast tradition, of which Ansel Adams was part of, Morley Bear, Edward Weston. There's a whole group that were called the West Coast tradition, centered out of Monterey, that photographed in a variety of ways, all in black and white, and photographed not only the coast and the nature and the landscape, but also things like this, like the inside of a cabbage. Or a nautilus shell. Again, these are some of the most famous photographs from Edward Weston's catalog, and he is very well, highly collected. He has passed away, but highly collected in the art world. And again, these are the Oceano Dunes. So everybody sees it and says, oh, that must be Death Valley. No, this is the Oceano Dunes down there by Pismo Beach. A very difficult place to photograph. If you've ever tried and go out there, the wind blows all the time, and it's very difficult to photograph. The last one I'm going to talk about is another documentary photographer, was W. Eugene Smith. Probably one of the most prolific and one of the most sought-after photographers of his time in the 50s, 60s, and late into the 70s, but a tortured soul in many respects. Photographed war, one of his most famous photographs of this, of a GI saving a baby or attempting to save a baby from one of the tunnels during World War II in the South Pacific, is a very famous photograph because it's anonymous. It's a soldier committed to war trying to save the life of an innocent. And again, you have to kind of project yourself into the photograph to really appreciate it. But W. Eugene Smith covered more than war. He covered a lot of different things for the old Life magazine. These are miners in Ireland. This is probably, it's my last slide I'm going to show you here. This is probably one of his most famous photographs, called Walk in Victory Garden. He had been wounded in World War II, spent a year in bed, didn't take any photographs whatsoever. Looked out his window one day while he was convalescing, saw his children walking through his garden in upstate New York, ran and got his camera, took this photograph, tried to sell it to Life magazine as a photograph of hope for a war-worn country, which is what the United States was. Life magazine turned him down, said it wasn't going to be worth anything. The photograph laid around just in W. Eugene Smith's office for 10 years. Finally, his agent picked it up, took it to a advertising agency. They picked it up and used it for the Ford Motor Company for their advertisements. And it eventually ended up full page in Life magazine. Kind of ironic there. One of his most tremendous photographs he ever took, although it's extremely simple. And again, like I said before, shot in his own house with his own kids. Anyway, as you do your photographer's report, take a look at historical photography and photographers. Look at how they did it. They're just like us. They're not any different. The only difference between them is they carry their camera all the time. They're ready, and when the opportunity for a great sense of a photograph comes along, they don't hesitate. They just do it. Good luck with this.